Day 1 of 8 days of debates over the EU withdrawal bill ended with rebel Conservative MPs branded mutineers for opposing the government's approach towards Brexit. The government itself emerged bruised but unscathed from the opening salvos, winning every vote in the Commons as expected, says Politico's Jack Blanchard. Prime Minister Theresa May will have enjoyed seeing Labour's own divisions come to the fore so early, as Brexiteer Frank Field rode with his own MPs, he adds, but the sustained attacks from her own backbenchers made clear that serious trouble lies ahead. Frank Field argues with fellow Labour MPs about the views of Labour voters on Brexit. https://t.cock1lcg4izupic.twitter.com/9jupe6b, BBC News UK. At BBC News November 14, 2017, the Big Row was about the thing that was supposed to defuse the Big Row, says The Times' Matt Chorley. Last week, in an article for the Daily Telegraph, the Prime Minister promised the date of Brexit would be written into the bill and so enshrined in law. This was meant to keep the Brexiteers happy, which it may well have done, but it has had the opposite effect on up to 20 Remainer Tories, says Chorley. Tory MP Dominic Grieve told his fellow MPs, "I will vote against it, no ifs, no buts, no maybes about this, no arm twisting," while even prominent Leave supporter Geoffrey Cox said it would curtail the room for manoeuvre of our own negotiators. Responding to the row, The Telegraph's front page featured photos of 15 Tory MPs the paper thinks will rebel against the government under the headline, The Brexit Mutineers. Wednesday, %U 2019's Daily Telegraph, %U 201 CTHE Brexit Mutineers, %U 201d BBC Papers Tomorrow Papers Today pic.twitter.com Countdipe, Ali Hodgkins Brown at Aliabe News. November 14, 2017, in the age of Twitter, the front page was attacked in the Commons within minutes of appearing online, says Blanchard. Tory MP Anna Soubry, one of the 15 rebels named, told the House, "This is a blatant piece of bullying that goes to the very heart of democracy." Labour MP Chuka Umunna said it was an ideological witch hunt. And Brexit Minister Steve Baker put out a statement saying, "I regret any media attempts to divide our party." Of course, printing a list of the alleged rebels is itself not controversial, says the Huffington Post's Paul Waugh. What is more worrying for some of them is the menace implied in putting them on a front page. The New Statesman's Stephen Bush argues the Telegraph's report could spur the MPs on to revolt. "The thing is that once you're on the front of a newspaper as a Brexit mutineer, many of those negative consequences are baked in no matter what you do next," he says. "So you might as well just rebel." However, Waugh says there are still doubts over whether there are enough rebels to actually defeat the government on the key issue of setting an exit day in statute. He adds, "This is a numbers game and thanks to Labour leavers it would take at least 13 Tory rebels to inflict any defeat." Some consider the Telegraph mugshots a cunning whip's weapon, given that more than half the alleged rebels were unlikely to do anything more than abstain. Brexit May fends off Tory rebellion. 15 November Prime Minister Theresa May has avoided a Tory revolt, after MPs voted on plans to repeal the 1972 European Communities Act by 318 votes to 68, on the first of 8 days of debate of a key Brexit bill. However, May is reportedly facing stiff opposition to her plan to enshrine a specific date for Brexit in law, with at least 15 Conservative MPs indicating they will side with Labour on the issue. The so-called Brexit mutineers are refusing legally to endorse the move, giving rise to accusations of a mutiny that threatens to wipe out the Prime Minister's majority and plunge the party into crisis, according to The Telegraph. Former Attorney General Dominic Grieve pictured said he would vote against the amendment regardless of blood-curdling threats and arm-twisting from Conservative whips, The Guardian reports. Debate will resume later today, with MPs expected to consider Labour's calls for guarantees on workers' rights and the environment, the BBC says. MPs to be given a final vote on Brexit deal. 14 November The government sought to head off a major Tory revolt last night by announcing that Parliament will get a vote on the final Brexit deal before the country leaves the EU. Addressing the Commons before the introduction of the EU withdrawal bill today, Brexit Secretary David Davis said the terms of the UK's exit, including any financial settlement, transition deal and agreement on citizen rights, would have to become law via new legislation, allowing MPs to amend and even reject it. He added, however, that there would be no parliamentary vote if Britain and the EU cannot agree terms, in which case the UK will exit the EU and trade under WTO rules. The climb down, at the beginning of what is likely to be a make-or-break 2 weeks for the government, represents a major concession by Theresa May as she looks to avoid defeat in the Commons. 10 Conservative MPs had signed an amendment insisting the promised meaningful vote had to take the form of standalone legislation. The offer of a vote effectively ends the prospect of a planned 11th-hour legal challenge to the final Brexit deal on the grounds that it had not been approved by Parliament, says the Daily Telegraph. However, The Guardian says opposition MPs are divided over the significance of Davis's concession. Labour shadow Brexit Secretary Sir Keir Starmer said it was a significant climb down from a weak government on the verge of defeat, but added that, like everything with this government, the devil will be in the detail. Ministers must now go further, he said. They need to accept Labour's amendments that would ensure transitional arrangements, and protect jobs and the economy from a cliff edge. Clearly this is an attempt to see off amendments that go much further than David Davis on a meaningful vote. It is vital the EU withdrawal bill is amended to provide for a proper, not a fake, meaningful vote before any exit day. 2. Chukwuemeka Chukwuemeka. On November 13, 2017, the Lib Dem Brexit spokesman, Tom Brake, went further, reiterating his party's call for a second referendum on the final deal. Arguing that a parliamentary vote simply isn't good enough, he said that since the people voted to leave the EU, they should get to decide whether to accept the deal the government has negotiated. If they reject the government's Brexit deal, they must have the option to stay in the EU. Others, such as Labour's Chris Leslie, have attacked the government's offer as a sham. James McGrory, the executive director of Open Britain, which is campaigning for a soft Brexit, questioned whether the offer by the government amounted to a meaningful vote and said the proposed bill had to be more than a target or leave it fait accompli. Davis warned that if MPs reject the legislation, then the UK will leave the EU without a deal. Critics have said this effectively means MPs would have to accept a deal, in whatever form it takes, or risk the chaos resulting from the hardest of Brexits. According to The Guardian's Andrew Sparrow, in private, government sources suggest that there is very little chance of amendments to the bill passed by the Commons leading to the EU agreeing to change the terms of a Brexit deal already negotiated by the government. All this raises the question of whether the government has enough to bring Tory rebels back on side. This climb down does not remotely mean that other grievances over the existing Brexit legislation will disappear, says the BBC's political editor Laura Kunzberg, nor does it mean that the next few weeks will suddenly become plain sailing. To highlight the dangers still facing the government, The Times has listed a number of voting danger zones, ranging from amendments to the role of the EU Charter on Human Rights after Brexit and the controversial provision of Henry VII powers to the planned exit date and appropriation of powers by devolved administrations. Brexit is reversible, says expert who drafted Article 5010. November. The legal expert who drafted Article 50 of the Lisbon Treaty says the UK could still reverse Brexit right up until the moment of departure, even if Theresa May adds the time and date to the EU withdrawal bill. Lord John Kerr, the former UK ambassador to the European Union, told BBC Radio 4's Today programme that the Brexiteers in the cabinet would be misleading the public in suggesting Brexit is irreversible. He spoke hours after the government confirmed it wanted an amendment to the withdrawal bill to set a fixed departure point of 11 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time midnight in Brussels on the 29th of March 2019. We are leaving the European Union. On the 29th of March 2019, the PM insisted in an article in the Daily Telegraph yesterday. Kerr, now a crossbench peer, said the UK could still opt to stay in the EU. At any stage we can change our minds if we want to, and if we did we know that our partners would actually be very pleased indeed, he said. It is misleading to suggest that a decision that we are taking autonomously in this country about the timing of our departure, we are required to take by a provision of EU treaty law. Meanwhile, Brexit talks continued in Brussels at the end of a week of negotiations between the UK and the EU that has yielded little progress. The EU's chief negotiator, Michel Barnier, has given the UK a 12-week deadline to provide vital clarification on the financial commitments it is willing to honour as part of its settlement to clear its EU debts. Or as Politico's Jack Blanchard puts it, EU officials want to see the colour of her money. The next EU summit is in December, when a decision will be made about whether there has been enough progress to discuss a transition and possible future trade deal. According to FT political editor George Parker, May's team is working on different scenarios that would see her considerably increase the €20 billion she has already put on the table. Brexit. EU preparing for fall of Theresa May's government. 9 August. The slow dance of Brexit talks resume today with little hope of a breakthrough, and reports that European Union leaders are predicting Theresa May's departure by the end of the year. Fears are growing in Brussels that the instability of Mrs May's government raises the real prospect of a change of leadership, or elections leading to a Labour victory. The Times says, round 6 of the Brexit talks kicks off after a week of high drama at number 10, with the loss of 2 cabinet ministers, both pro-Brexit allies of the Prime Minister, and an admission that the 58 Brexit economic impact statements underpinning negotiations don't actually exist, or at least not in the format described by Brexit Secretary David Davis. BBC Brussels reporter Adam Fleming told Radio 4 that today's Brexit negotiations will probably amount to a lot of faffing about. The UK has stalled on issues including EU citizens' rights, the Northern Ireland border question, and the so-called divorce bill, outlining how much the UK must pay the 27 member states to settle its tab. Bureaucrats hope the deadlock will force British companies to relocate across the Channel, says the Sun, and are already drawing up plans to exploit Theresa May's government potentially falling before Christmas. The PM is widely expected to carry out a one-in, one-out reshuffle to replace Minister Priti Patel, who quit as International Development Secretary last night. Her resignation follows the departure of former Defense Secretary Michael Fallon, who was embroiled in a sex scandal. Patel quit, or possibly was pushed over secretive meetings that she held with Israel politicians and organizations.